Well, Europe's latest heatwave has brought record temperatures into parts of the continent and caused what researchers call excess deaths.
A few years ago, I was living in Berlin, and on one particularly hot summer's day, I decided to look into getting myself an air conditioner because, of course, living there, I did not have one. I was looking into what kind of a little air conditioner I should get myself. Probably one that was small and should be relatively easy to install, especially for my small studio apartment. I mean, that should be easy, right? Well, I looked into it a little bit and I quickly found out just how wrong I was. Because once you consider the cost of a certified tradesman and technician to actually install the unit, as well as needing the landlord's sign-off on actually being able to install the unit, you are probably looking at several thousands of euros and a mountain of paperwork before you even bought the air conditioning unit itself. Needless to say, I never did end up getting that air conditioner. And this is the harsh reality that a lot of other Europeans found out this year the hard way. Because by the end of June of this year, the heat wave has killed over 10,000 people across Europe, most of them over the age of 65. And that stands in contrast to the rest of the world, especially the US and basically all of Asia, where air conditioning isn't really something you have to even think about. You just have it. It's just part of your apartment or your house, like having basic running water. In Europe, however, only 1 in 5 households are equipped with an air conditioner. And a lot of people who died this summer would still be here if they had access to an appliance that costs about the same as a modern flagship phone. So the obvious question, why don't they just install one? Now, before we dive in, if you're into this kind of stuff, East versus West, culture, economics, especially coming from somebody who's actually lived on the inside of both sides of the equation, go ahead and subscribe. There's a whole lot more of this coming. Okay, here's the thing. This is not really the story about people who are not wanting air conditioning, but rather it's the story of what happens to those that try to install an air conditioner in Europe today. Take the city of Geneva. To get a permit for an AC unit, it's not something you can just apply for. You need to demonstrate a medical need. Saying you'd like to live more comfortably or get a good night's sleep just isn't enough. There has to be a medical need. Take Portofino in Italy. Try to get a unit installed without full approval and you're looking at a hefty fine that can run past 40,000 euros. In fact, there are documented cases of neighbors snitching on each other for just that. Somewhere, someone has called the authorities on their neighbors for wanting to be less hot. Britain and France both restrict installation specifically to preserve the look of their historic buildings, which, fine, I get wanting your cities to look nice, but that's a subjective value judgment about aesthetics actively being enforced in the middle of a summer that's quite literally killing people on a continent that's warming faster than anywhere else on Earth. And that's even before you get to what's considered the normal process. The one I ran into in Berlin. Installing an aircon in Germany isn't a simple purchase. It's an entire renovation project. You need a certified tradesman because apparently drilling a single hole requires a license. You also need your landlord to sign off, because installing a wall air conditioning unit legally gets filed right next to the ability to knock that entire wall down. Depending on your building, your neighbors get a say too. Everyone in that chain gets a cut, financially or procedurally, before you're allowed to be less hot in your own home. Now, the cause of this isn't just practical, needing the right people to install it. There's an entire ideological layer stacked on top. It's not just that the permits are slow and difficult. There's a sincerely and genuinely held position in a lot of European climate discourse that you shouldn't want air conditioning at all. An urban adaptation expert at the European Environment Agency put it about as plainly as possible. I don't think that should be the solution anywhere. Meaning, they don't believe AC should be a solution to increasingly hot summers. That's not some weirdo's fringe take. That's an EU climate official on the record talking about the very appliance correlated with not dying. Now that's a genuinely difficult position to defend, especially to someone whose grandmother just spent the weekend in a hospital ward with no air conditioning. Because in France, like most of Europe, they simply do not have it. I don't want to villainize anyone here. The permits exist because someone at some point decided that historic buildings and quiet streets were worth protecting, and that's absolutely true. The environmental agency isn't crazy. Cooling load is a real energy problem, especially at scale. But somewhere between let's be thoughtful about how we do this and you need a doctor's note to not overheat, I think we very clearly lost the plot. And unfortunately, that's now showing up in the mortality count. Now let's take a bit and zoom out, because across Europe, you start to realize that this whole aircon thing is not some odd isolated quirk, but rather it's a symptom of something much larger. Because the same regulatory instinct that demands a multi-agency approval process for installing a wall-mounted AC unit is the one that's running the entire continent. It's why rail upgrades take decades instead of years. And it's why bridges that have been marked as desperately needing repairs tend to stay open for years. Because attempting to fix them means navigating these same bureaucratic layers, just at an even larger scale. Slow, careful, and protective, sure, but increasingly just slow. Now put the European welfare state next to that. Europe built a genuinely generous social safety net, pensions, healthcare, unemployment protections, on a population pyramid that assumed that there would always be more young workers than old retirees. That assumption stopped being true a long time ago. The math doesn't work without more people paying in than the domestic birth rate produces. So the solution is immigration, not as a political or ideological project, but as a direct, necessary input to make the math work. It's less a policy choice than an arithmetic necessity to keep the system afloat. And that math has real social costs. Rapid demographic change at the scale Europe's experienced over the past decade drains social cohesion. That's not a controversial thing to say anymore. You can see the results of that friction in how visibly much of Europe has swung to the right over the last several years. I'm not going to pretend that's the entire explanation though, because of course it isn't. And I don't want to make this a political video either, so I'm not going to dive too deep into it now. But all of this is downstream of the same financial math everyone's been trying to solve. Here's the actual result of all of that today. A 2026 survey found that 21% of people in Germany are actively considering emigrating. And the top reason cited wasn't money, it was quality of life. Zoom out even further, and 41% of young Europeans across the continent say that they're planning to or want to move abroad. In Spain, it's already half of young people within the next 3 years. And it's not just mainland Europe. 257,000 British nationals left the UK last year alone, post-Brexit, outside the EU entirely, same reasons. This is not just disillusioned people ranting about it online, because it's a fifth to half of an entire generation across multiple countries coming to the same conclusion. This is not working for me personally, and that leaves them looking for something better. So they leave. And a lot of them end up making the same journey that I already have as well. Somewhere like where I am sitting right now. Vietnam, maybe Thailand, Bali, or wherever. And things move really fast here. I experienced the difficulty of trying to find an apartment in Berlin myself. It took me several months and over 400 applications to finally find a place to stay. However, here in Vietnam, it's completely different. Within a week, I was able to find an apartment that I was personally happy with. And before the start of the next, I had moved in. That speed carries through a lot of other parts of life here as well. Want your business registered? Done. Moped fixed? Easy. Aircon unit installed? No problem at all. It happens with a blazing efficiency that, coming from Europe, honestly feels too good to be true. And if that's all you've ever known, it might even make you a little suspicious. But it's important to qualify that and be realistic here, because that speed doesn't come without a cost. It's not evidence Southeast Asia has somehow solved the regulatory riddle Europe hasn't figured out. It's actually the opposite. The same protections and laws that slow things down so drastically in Europe simply haven't been built here yet. Tenant laws that would fight for your deposit. Labor laws that would stop you from being sacked with no notice. Building codes that enforce the kind of standards you'd see in Berlin. That stuff isn't absent because it's unnecessary, it's absent because it's still too early for it to have been established here. And if we're being honest, the same foreigners enjoying that speed and pace would be the first ones furious if that same lack of protection applied to them back home. Nobody wants their own rental contract to run on Southeast Asian levels of tenant protection, and nobody wants their own employer to run the ship on Southeast Asian levels of labor law. The deregulation is great, right up until your deposit, your work contract, or your severance is on the other side of it. So moving to Asia doesn't mean the grass is always greener. It's a trade-off you knowingly have to make. All it does is change who foots the bill, for now. That's not permanent. Those things will be coming at some point as these countries and their laws develop. A lot of people out there are framing this phenomenon, the great emigration of the younger generation out of Europe, as some kind of rebellion against the system. Honestly, I think calling it that is a little condescending to the people doing it. It's not a middle finger to the system. It's a whole lot simpler and more logical than that. It's a number on a spreadsheet. Rents are lower, taxes are lower, and the bureaucracy that would have cost me thousands of euros and months of my life to install a simple air conditioner just doesn't exist here. For a lot of people around my age, that math is just clear. That's really all there is to it, and that's the entire decision. At the end of the day, a lot of people out there, including myself, have found that they can build better lives for themselves outside of the old country. So back to the number that we opened on. This year, over 10,000 people passed away in a heat wave in one of the richest parts of the planet. Because turning on a machine that cools your room was wrapped up in so much process and litigation that a meaningful number of them simply could not do it. And they ended up paying the ultimate price. I never did get that aircon unit installed in the end. And I remember sitting on a phone call with a guy quoting me 4,000 euros to drill a single small hole into my wall, thinking, this is genuinely absurd. Everyone downstream from that call wanted their cut. Either way, my room stayed hot regardless. Now, if you multiply that phone call by an entire continent, you begin to understand why so many people are just beginning to get up and leave. If you made it to the end of the video and liked it, consider hitting the like button. Thanks for watching, and as always, take care.